Welcome back. Thanks for watching Action for Living. So this session is the second part of Act 3, which focuses on the trouble with thinking. Here's a quick recap from part 1. So we've looked at how our mind can work on automatic. We can't readily control what our brains bring to our awareness. Our brains being experts at making connections and automatically focusing in on things we consider threatening or unpleasant. We've covered how language can mess us up and how when we have these unpleasant private experiences, we can attempt to suppress them, to push them out of our minds. We do this because we are fused with the thoughts that accompany them. So in this session, building on from part 1, we're now going to explore how we can construct an image of ourselves through language and how through fusion this can limit our lives. We'll look at diffusion and several techniques we can employ to manage our tendencies to fuse. We'll also, as we have every week, spend a bit of time exploring our values, our flexibility, and our mindfulness practice. Who do you think you are? If someone asked you to describe yourself, what would you say? You would find it easy to provide concrete facts like your name, your birthday, your address, but describing what you're like as a person would probably be a lot more difficult. If you asked yourself, who am I really? Your problem-solving mind would probably come up with all kinds of suggestions. And although these suggestions would be snippets of your story, you would be tempted to accept them as being the whole truth. So here's a simple activity to show you what your mind thinks about you. In a moment, read the first part of the sentence as soon as it appears and complete it in your head as quickly as possible. Are you ready to complete the sentence with the first thing that comes to mind? A really good thing about me is that. So how did you find that? Did your mind search frantically for a good way of ending the sentence? I imagine for quite a few of us it may have taken quite some effort to think of something good about ourselves. You might also have felt that we were inventing or making up something good rather than reporting what is really there in our heads. It doesn't tend to feel like an easy or automatic process. The reason for this is when I asked you to complete the sentence, a really good thing about me is that your problem solver mind will have kicked into gear to try to come up with some way to complete the sentence. And when it did, you probably accepted it with some relief. Most of the time, we just go along with what it suggests to us. So now we're going to try the same activity again one more time, but with a new sentence. This time, as well as coming up with and ending the sentence, see if you can also catch your mind at work. I have an unfortunate tendency to. Were you able to tune in to your mind at work as it frantically searched for ideas? As I'm sure many of you have noticed, with this particular sentence, our mind seems to work a lot quicker than with the first one. When we ask our mind to think about negative features of ourselves, it almost seems easier. We therefore feel like we're reporting a true reflection, contrasting with inventing a more positive statement. So we tend to be more fused to the idea that the negative thoughts are true. And not only this, but any answer to questions about who you are or what you're like will tend to have a real tendency towards overgeneralization and oversimplification. So going back to our first question, who am I really? For many of you, your minds will have come up with some ideas about yourself. I'm a caring person, I'm a grumpy person, I'm a funny person. All of these thoughts you have about yourself may be true at some point, but it's impossible for them to all be true all of the time. And that's because who you are is a very complex and ever-changing thing. You're not a fixed and solid object. Though our values may guide us across situations, we often adapt ourselves to the world around us. Are you the same at work and at home, for example? Our mind is constantly telling us stories about ourselves, about other people, about the world in general. As we've already discussed, these stories are often simplified versions of reality. They're not the truth. The problem comes when we fuse with the stories our mind tells ourselves. Think of some of the stories we tell ourselves. I'm not good enough. I'm stupid. No one will ever love me. We may try and argue with our mind. However, as we hear these same stories over and over again, we can allow them to define who we are. It's as if we're always listening to doom and gloom radio broadcasted by our mind. Gloom about the past, doom about the future, and dissatisfaction with the present. We let this incessant broadcasting dominate our lives, and this can really add to our suffering. We're aware of many things as being something we experience. The light coming through the windows, the seats beneath us, the wind outside the window. We're also aware of our bodies, our heartbeat, stomach rumbling when we're hungry. And with all of these things, we don't consider them to be us. However, we tend to experience our thoughts as us. The reality is that we're not any of these things. We're experiencing them. So there's a difference between my thinking and me. The distinction between you and your thinking mind is really important. Try to see the working of our mind as if it's a process or an object that we can see and feel. Something we're able to observe and take notice of without necessarily becoming caught up or fused with it. This is why diffusion is so important. It's a skill that assists us in making this distinction. Diffusion means recognizing that words are only words, and thoughts are only thoughts, and images are only images. This prevents us from getting hooked. Here's an exercise to reinforce this. What is this? A pineapple? Does it smell like a pineapple? Does it taste like a pineapple? No, it's only the image of a pineapple. It's not actually a pineapple. So the idea or image or thought is not the real thing. Okay, so that wasn't really fair. Yet all the images in your mind, all the thoughts or beliefs you had about the pineapple are not the pineapple itself. They may be inaccurate or accurate reflections or representations about the pineapple, but they're still not an actual pineapple. In other words, beliefs and imaginings are only in your head. They're not in the world. So the idea or image or thought is not the real thing, even if it reflects it. The thought that I'm stupid is not the reality of me being stupid. The idea that I might really get ill with COVID-19 is not the reality that I will get really ill with COVID-19. The belief that I'm unlovable is not the reality of me being unlovable. And let's explore diffusion with four diffusion techniques. First diffusion technique. This first technique underpins all of the rest. To be able to look at our minds in a more detached and diffused way, it's important to develop an awareness of how our minds have a tendency to label or judge. Labels are personal judgments about objects, events, or people. We naturally label everything. You're probably even labeling this video right now. And thank our minds for this. It's our mind doing what they do. But that doesn't mean we have to buy into it. Instead, we can simply thank our minds for the information to help distance ourselves from our minds, allowing us time and space to make more informed decisions about experiences and situations. So let's try first to be more precise about our labels so we aren't overgeneralizing or oversimplifying. Try saying to yourself, I'm overwhelmed by anxiety, and then I'm anxious, which feels like you'd be more able to manage. All we've changed is one word, but that seemingly small change can have a big impact on our state of mind or our experience of life. Simply noticing when we make these labels is the first step in diffusing. The second diffusion technique, then, is to think of a word that stings you, something that's difficult but not really distressing. So, an example could be disorganized, forgetful, unfit, useless. Now, repeat this in your mind by saying, I am, and then whatever the word is. Just continue to think about this phrase for the next 20 seconds. Notice how that felt. And now change the phrase to this one. I'm having the thought that I am, and then the same word again. Continue to repeat this phrase in your mind for another 10 seconds or so. Now let's go one step further and say, I notice I'm having the thought that I am, and whatever the word was. And continue to repeat this phrase in your mind for another 10 seconds. Okay, how was that? Did it have less of an impact? Were you hooked in less? There's something about verbalizing, saying it out loud, that lets us hear our own thoughts and re-experience them. This means that we're noticing and labeling a thought as a thought and starting to diffuse from it. With feelings, notice how we built upon the initial sentence, so I am anxious, to separate it from ourselves. I'm having the thought that I'm anxious. I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that I'm anxious. Placing our thoughts or feelings in a broader perspective enables us to detach from them, giving us more control over our behavior by enabling us to act in a way that is consistent with our values rather than dependent on our thoughts and feelings at that point in time. With the third diffusion technique, this can be demonstrated using an act technique which, for a short while, reduces a word to a sound and disrupts its meaning. You can experience this now with an activity called milk, milk, milk. To begin this exercise, imagine that you can see, feel, even taste milk. If you can do this, think about what this means, that you're experiencing a taste of milk without any milk being present. Such effects come from the fusion, or in a sense the confusion, of a sound, the word milk, with a white liquid. Having encouraged you to engage in such confusion, I'm now going to encourage diffusion to try to separate the sound from the idea. To do this exercise, you might need to check that no one else can hear you. When we do this, you might want to close your eyes. Then, when I tell you to begin, I want you to start saying the word milk out loud as fast as you can until I say stop. We'll say it together for about 40 seconds, and it's important that you say it too and don't just listen to me. Say it as fast as you can while still clearly pronouncing the word. So continue to saying it, not just in a babble. Okay, so when you're ready, and until I tell you to stop, continue to say the word again and again out loud. Milk, 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 milk. Phew, how did this feel to you? What happened to the meaning of the word? What happened to that cold, creamy white substance that you pour into your tea? Did the word continue to have its original meaning throughout the exercise, or did it lose its meaning somewhere along the way? Did the sound seem to change? Did it begin to sound different or odd? Did the beginning and the end of the word start to blend together into one continuous sound? Most people who do this exercise do experience the diffusion effect to some extent. They do find that the sound of the word becomes diffused from the meaning of the word. We wanted you to experience this to increase your appreciation that words are just words, as simple as that. Single words can cause us grief, as in name calling, but we also hold a large stock of phrases and sentences that can be very easily triggered. Unfortunately, some of these patterns in our mind take the form of quite harsh self-criticism and blame. So Identify a word that particularly distresses you, for example, stupid or fat or useless, and then subject this word to the same constant repetition treatment in order to reduce the sting that this word has for you. This probably seems like a very strange thing to do, and yet all of us have, at one time or another, felt like a word just doesn't look or sound right, as we've naturally become diffused from it for a while. And that's really what we're after. Of course, it's not just about words themselves, but the patterns of how we use them. In the fourth diffusion technique, notice how normally we have a certain way of saying things, a tone and a speed of voice that it might even be accompanied by certain facial expressions. This diffusion technique aims to disrupt these normal associations. We're still going to say these sentences, but we're going to do it in a very different way to how we are used to voicing them. So let's choose one of these sentences at a time. So let's say the first one really slowly. I'm feeling very depressed these days. Next, let's use a different voice. Try making your voice much deeper or higher than it is usually. I'm a real waste of space. I'm a real waste of space. Lastly, we can try putting our thoughts to a song. You might be able to find an app or some way of recording a distorted song of your voice. This could be really helpful in aiding diffusion. Oh, I'm really scared of shopping on my own. Oh, I'm really scared of shopping on my own. Oh, I'm really scared of shopping. I'm really scared of shopping. I'm really scared of shopping on my own. Now, for the fifth diffusion technique, we're going to imagine that we're in a cinema and that the image of what we're hearing in our mind's eye is playing on a big screen over and over again. With this diffusion technique, though, we need to suggest that if you're experiencing flashbacks or reliving experiences following a traumatic event, or you're deeply distressed by memories of an event, you probably best not trying this technique by yourself. Learning to diffuse from really painful memories should always be done with an appropriately trained therapist. Having said that, this last diffusion technique can be especially useful for the kinds of images that go through our minds. So now shift that image on the big screen so that it's still the same image, still the same scene, but maybe now it's all playing in black and white. Or maybe everyone's wearing cowboy hats. Maybe as you imagine it, the sound has gone and all you can see are the subtitles. Or the sound's back on, but now it's become like a musical. With all of these diffusion techniques, they might seem a little bit strange or a bit silly at first, but all of these are moving us from fusion to diffusion and from the avoidance of discomfort to the acceptance of discomfort. And so, in terms of the Fear to Dare acronyms, we're moving in the direction of being able to manage things better. For the home practice, the first exercise involves cognitive diffusion. So first being aware of our tendency to label things, then seeing if you're able to notice that you're thinking that, using the repetition of a distressing word, and then repeating it constantly until it loses its meaning. Distorting a sentence, maybe by saying it slowly or in a different voice or as a song, and then trying some different image distortions. The second home practice exercise is linking our values to goals. So using the values you identified in the very first videos and the areas of your life that you feel you're living up to these in the least amount from the bullseye that we used in the second session of ACT. Select 3 of them and begin to come up with a goal that may be associated with them. These can be personal to you, and we recommend this. But if it's too hard, then broaden out and think generically about what sort of goals such values might have in general or for others. In the final 2 videos of Act 4, we'll be exploring goal setting, and having your own goal may prove helpful to you in using them as we go through to help make it more realistic. The third home practice exercise is more psychological flexibility. And this involves taking an ordinary object, then giving yourself 2 minutes to come up with as many uses for that object as possible. So a brick could be a step, a doorstop, a paperweight, a weapon, a diving aid, a nutcracker, a cheap dumbbell, a way to break a window. Trying this with really innocuous objects like a paperclip, a piece of paper, a shoe, a cardboard box. And then we've got another mindfulness exercise called Leaves on the Stream. You can find both a script and a guided recording for this on our website. Thanks for listening to part 2 of Act 3. I hope you enjoyed today's session and that you've been able to discover which diffusion techniques are most helpful for you. Remember that this course is made up of 4 sessions in total and that each is split into 2 videos. So in total, there are 8 videos. For each session, there's a handout summarizing the content discussed and also providing opportunities to practice the skills and techniques. You can find this handout on our website. Next, it's the final act, which is focusing on getting on with your life, bringing together all the skills you've learnt and developed and how they can help you move forward with your life.